that was really heavy.
Someone read my Pedoshoku review and wrote a reply that is longer than the actual review. Absolutely nothing about it is useful feedback, and I will prove it to you by breaking down his breaking down of my review, only with actual useful feedback.
We start terribly wrong. Even if you were to prove that I committed any mistakes inside of the video regarding the extractions that you provided, that wouldn't deem the next criticisms, or the ones presented after that, invalid. As a matter of fact, since you haven't even gone through them, you cannot entirely know whether they are valid or not. You are making a blind guess, and blind guesses are not objective whatsoever, because even if the things that you were going to say were to be valid criticisms, which they are not, they would only apply to certain statements that you took out of context, and not to the entirety of the response nor to the other criticisms. That's why that's not valid. This is just a lame excuse from a lame critic who cannot back up any of their barking.
So he quotes me, calling the show boring after it became slice of life, to be unfounded criticism because I don't provide any examples. Only I do provide examples right after I wrote that. He even quotes them on his reply. You even see them on screen.
At no point did he really provide any examples of the claim that he made right there, because his claim was that the initial segment of the story continued the monotonous pacing characteristic of the previous season. He didn't provide at any point any examples of the previous season having monotonous pacing and also predominantly depicting slice-of-life scenarios. Not only did he fail to prove it for this first season, because there are no citations or any examples at all in this review, but also, the argument fails because being a plot that takes place in a school does not necessarily make it instantly a slice-of-life scenario. Why? Because the justification of the claim that it was monotonous and that it had bad pacing was that it turned into a trivial school drama. That's not an example nor a justification. You are assuming the thing that you want to prove. You are trying to prove that it is monotonous by saying that it is trivial, when being monotonous is one of the aspects of being trivial. That's not a proof. That is repeating the same thing that you intend to prove. That's called begging the question, and it is a form of fallacious reasoning. Then he says, devoid of action, no example whatsoever, nor did he provide any kind of reasoning behind that baseless claim. Devoid of adventure, that doesn't have any examples when, as a matter of fact, the second part of the second season focuses on the subplot related to the labyrinth, which is precisely focused on adventure. Also, we get more information about how the magic teleportation circles work. We get more information about the world. We go to the demon continent also. We get a lot of new information about the world itself, so I wouldn't really say that that's founded criticism. Even if the three claims were to be true, lacking action or adventure does not imply being monotonous. Otherwise, each and every single romantic novel would be monotonous by that exact definition. And then, to restate what really occurred here, he really doesn't provide any examples. So he's just lying at this point.
He just complained I hadn't given any examples before I called the show boring. For Clay is a clown.
Just to put you into context, this is the guy who is calling me a clown.
Hey, mom, come see, this guy here, he killed himself because he watches modern anime. Yeah, the same community I'm part of, mom. You're not very proud, are you? But who cares, I'm normal.
Huh? No, you absolute buffoon, you were not criticized because of not providing proof before the claim. You were criticized because you didn't provide any proof for that claim. As a matter of fact, I only said that it was an unfounded criticism. I never said that you didn't try to prove it later or that you didn't try to prove it before. So, I didn't make any reference to the time or the place in which you should have provided said justification or example. I didn't even talk about anything related to that. So, that's another criticism that is really absurdly dumb, and it's not a surprise coming from someone like you because that's your standard quality of criticism, being mediocre.
Then he complains about me calling the show monotonous because it became slice of life. This is not something only I say. Most people who are not watching the show for the redemption story agree that they were watching it for the adventure.
First of all, I would like for Snob to actually provide any proof that that is certainly the thought that most of the people who watch this show, good luck asking to at least 50% of the people who watched the show, actually have. because you are just making a faulty generalization without any proof. Not to mention that you are incurring into an ad populum fallacy. Saying that it is something and having people repeat the same thing does not prove it, especially in this case, because you are trying to talk about the show, not about the opinion of the people who watched it. And, well, that was just a faulty generalization without any proof and also an ad populum fallacy. No one cares about 3 people claiming that they watch Mushoku for the adventure part of it. 3 people are not representative of thousands of watchers.
Taking out the adventure leaves only the slice of life story of a creep who constantly does terrible things.
This is just a false dichotomy, because you are at no point explaining why not being an adventure story would imply being a slice of life story. That is literally the definition of a false dichotomy fallacy. And then, you falsely claim that Rudius, during that season and during the parts that you criticized, behaved like an absolute creep. First of all, he couldn't even get his shit up. How can you say that he had any sexual desire towards anybody if he cannot even get aroused, you absolute mouth breather? Second of all, your reductionism of the events of the plot is baffling. We get an entire season mostly focused towards character development, Rudius' trauma after what occurred with Eris, his utter incompetence when it comes to forming genuine relationships with women, to the point of completely ruining the one she had with Sarah, Sylphie's past, the relationship she had with Ariel and Luke, the new character she had to fabricate in order to act as Ariel's male bodyguard during all the time she got separated from his family, Nanahoshi's past and his current goal, the interactions between Nanahoshi, Sylphie and Rudy, Nanahoshi's depression related to his desire to come back home in contrast to Rudius's desire to remain in the new world. The romance subplot between Rudius and his current wife who he couldn't even recognize at that moment, the apparition of Badagati, the arrival of Norn and Aisha, Norn's depression that makes a perfect parallelism between what occurred to him in his previous life, Paul improving as a father, Rudius and Paul having an actual one-to-one conversation about life and completely mundane things like sex, Paul's sacrifice, Rudius's trauma, Roxy acting as an emotional support for him in Sylphie's absence, Norn's rejection of his new wife and, finally, Sylphie's acceptance of Roxy as his new wife after understanding the role they both have when it comes to acting as the emotional support of Rudy and that both of them are equally loved by Rudius. As a matter of fact, you have an entire video series of a psychologist analyzing all the characters of Mushoku chapter by chapter, whose name is Psyculturist and whose channel I will be leaving in the description of the video. You have a lot of things to analyze about that season, and the only thing that you can do is point out to Rudius storing some panties, kidnapping 2 people who deserve to be in jail and buying a slave instead of freeing them, completely ignoring the enormous trouble he would get himself into with authorities that have a lot more power than him in case of trying to go against the tradition of slavery inside that world. As a matter of fact, I will focus more on the subplot between Linnea and Persina, because the amount of misconceptions that there seem to be in regards to that topic is absolutely baffling. I will not try to justify his behavior, because no matter the context, kidnapping is bad, but I am certainly going to claim that they completely deserved it. The people that he tried to kidnap did terrible things inside of that university. They constantly blackmailed, bullied and also abused other girls of the facility. As a matter of fact, some months ago, they had an actual gang that Ariel had to expel from the university because it was getting out of control. The girls weren't expelled because they were the royalty of the beast people, that's all, but they have done even worse stuff than Rudius did to them. And the punishment that they received, despite how cruel, is normal among beast people. If they were to be truly punished for the things that they did before, the bar was to be set at least to that level for the punishment to have any impact on them. Not to mention that, before Rudius kidnapped them, they threatened him with getting him naked in the middle of the university and kicking his balls in front of anyone until they felt satisfied. In comparison to the threat they made and the things they did in the past, Rudius' punishment can be perfectly deemed as mild.
The adventure part was both masking that and was also offering variety by not being just about a creep doing terrible things.
The problem is that your narrow view of the show, probably as narrow as your brain, about the events in the first part of the season does not correspond with what actually occurs, hence your overvaluation of the adventure aspect of it does not make any sense.
And yet this guy makes it seem like nobody cared about the action and the adventure and were only watching it for a pedophile who is peeping on children.
can you see why I call this guy an undiagnosed retard? He thinks that, because I blame him for not providing any proof about most of the fandom being there for the adventure aspect of the series, I am actively saying that they don't care at all about it. How can someone be this dumb? Do you honestly think that saying, you have no proof for that, equates to saying, nobody cares about it? Really? And this person has the balls to call someone a clown? Not to mention that he has yet again repeated his fallacious reductionism of the series. To put it in other terms, it would be like saying that Legend of the Galactic Heroes is 110 episodes worth of uninteresting info dump and dialogue as dry and uninteresting as the Sahara Desert. The reductionism is pretty clear, but the difference in this case would be that the criticism about Legend of the Galactic Heroes is true.
Without action and adventure, all you are left with are the worst aspects of the show.
And he keeps repeating the same absurd reductionism that was already addressed. Not to mention that he has introduced a new term here. He said that those would be the worst aspects of the show. Worst is the superlative form of bad, so we can safely assume that he is making a quality judgment of the series. Bad news, snob. Objective judgments of media do not exist, so you'll have to take those words and throw them directly into the trash bin. Or well, to your floor, since your house probably looks like a junkyard.
Therefore, my criticism is legit, for Clay is a clown.
Snob, your brain is as smooth as an ice skating rink.
Then he thinks he corrects me by saying he gets punished for his creepy behavior. Therefore, the show is not a sick power fantasy. I mean, he got a tsundere slap that was treated as a joke and was never brought up again, and then he got erectile dysfunction by the same tsundere that supposedly punished him and then came under him. Also, his dysfunction was not a punishment for something he did. She ran away and he couldn't get it up. What was he punished for? He was just feeling bad. He wasn't punished by not being able to get it up.
First of all, keep it up with the unfounded name calling to the characters of a series. The fact that you get so triggered about fictional characters says a lot about your maturity. Oh, sorry, I completely forgot. I know why you are triggered. This generic slop anime characters cannot compare in any way to the precious and incredibly well-written characters of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. That is why. Putting that aside, let's address the other points. You also said that the matter with Eris was treated as a joke. Dude literally got beaten up to the point that he had to kneel to ask Eris for forgiveness. It was only after genuinely expressing that he was sorry for what he did and admitting that he was a total prick that Eris reconsidered him as a potential partner in the future. At no time did she give up the boundaries she had established with Rudy. She made her intentions crystal clear, and she carried them up until the age she promised. Years of human relationships are not automatically ruined because of a person crossing your boundaries, especially if they recognize their mistakes after that occurred and you felt genuine love for them, like it was the case with Eris. You then, for some reason, criticized the fact that the same girl who with she had this problem later on took his virginity, ignoring the fact that the issue was completely settled that many years in the future and that it was Eris who decided to force him to having sex. Yes, because Rudy still was traumatized with what had happened some years ago when he tried to have sexual relationships with her, mentioned in the novel. Homie thought he was finna get beaten up again. Eris did it out of pure relief for the shitty situation she was going through with the loss of her family. And finally, you still misunderstand the concept of punishment. Just because the adverse situation was not a direct consequence of his morally questionable action does not make it any less of punishment. A child predator who gets eaten alive by an alligator, no joke it happened in real life, is what people would usually call divine retribution. And it certainly is a form of punishment, even if it is not a direct consequence of his status as a child predator. Him getting abandoned and going through depression is the exact equivalent of this, but it would rather be a punishment for all his misdeeds up to that point in time.
For Clay is a clown! And And finally, his ultimate proof of why my review is bad is because I used the author's intention to judge the show. To him this is bad because it doesn't matter what the author intended with the story, it's only how you feel at the moment.
Snob, how can you be this dense? Aesthetic relativism has nothing to do with judging things based upon how you feel at the moment. It is rather about the impossibility to judge any form of art in an objective manner. Yes, even trying to use your feelings for it can be deemed as invalid criticism. What we claim with relativism is that there is no way to arrive at an objective judgment of the events in a story, mainly because there are no objective standards. All standards are arbitrary, since all standards have to be arbitrarily chosen by a human being. You have a very poor understanding of art criticism.
Then how the shit is my criticism unfounded when it can be whatever I feel like at the moment?
Because it can't. Not only does aesthetic relativism not claim that you can invent as many things as you want about the plot of a story just basing yourself upon your feelings, but, also, at no point are judgments based upon feelings being deemed as valid. The events that occur in the plot are certainly objective. What we claim with relativism, again, is that there is no way to arrive at an objective judgment of those events. Is it that hard to understand, my fellow Gargamel?
You cannot complain about anything I said if it comes down to personal interpretations.
Yes, I can, not only because each of those things are not interpretations but straight-up falsehoods, but also because aesthetic relativism has nothing to do with your ability to make stuff up without any evidence about the series. Interpretations can be deemed as objectively wrong or not. What cannot really be deemed as objectively wrong or not are judgments, which are not the same. You are as dense as Wolframium, Snob.
I will let Digipedo to explain why.
People who are dropping just these like head-ass wacky interpretations of stories, and then when they get called out on how their interpretation doesn't make sense, especially when you consider the author's intent.
There is one falsehood and one truth being spoken here. First of all, interpretations can be objectively wrong, which is something that I agree with. Second of all, author's intention has nothing to do with the intention or the subsequent analysis of the thing he has created. As Barthes says in Death of the Author, the meaning of a text lies not in its origin but in its destination. One of the main arguments supporting this comes from linguistics. Arrangements of words do not need to be created by someone in order to exist. If you were to analyze all the digits of pi, for example, you would find at some point or another the entire Quixote written word by word in binary code. The same exact thing can exist without an author being there to create it, hence texts are completely independent of authors. As a matter of fact, authors are only nice additions. Moving away from the traditional idea of the author, Barthes begins to capitalize the word as if to draw a parallel with a higher entity, like God, can help us to see the relationship between writer and text in new ways. In the traditional view, the author is like a parent, who conceives the text rather as a parent conceives a child. The author thus exists before the novel or poem or play, and then creates that literary work. In Barthes' new way of viewing the relationship between the two, writer and text are born simultaneously, because whenever we read a literary work we are engaging with the writer here and now, rather than having to go back, to give our own example, 400 years to consider Shakespeare the Renaissance author. Shakespeare, as writer, exists now, in the moment we read his works on the page in the 21st century. Then, we should think of not the author but the scripter. Barthes used the French scripteur in his original essay, a rare French term which means, essentially, copyist. We shouldn't view a work of literature as a kind of secular version of a sacred text, where the author is a god who has imbued the text with a single meaning.
They go, well, author intent doesn't matter because death of the author. Fuck the author, I'm just doing my take. The point of the concept of death of the author is not to give you permission to do that.
Death of the author is at no point saying something like, fuck the author. What is rather being said is you won't find the true essence of a text paying attention to the author but rather to the writer. You can still choose to ignore what Barthes said, but the validity of what he said will still be upheld. Furthermore, it is not hard to prove that text can be conceived independently of authors.
To tell the author that they are dead is tremendously disrespectful to the author.
No one is going around telling the authors that they are dead. What is being said is that their persona does not genuinely participate in any way regarding the meaning of a text. Even if you consider this disrespectful, that is not a valid argument.
You, the audience, are all that matters, and who gives a fuck who made it? Who gives a fuck about whatever they were trying to accomplish? It's all about me. It's just a very narcissistic way to approach art.
Labeling it as narcissistic does not address it in any way, shape, or form. You can label it in whichever way you want. The fact is that you hadn't deemed it in any way to be an incorrect approach.
Well, I don't even care what they were going for. I just care about what I got out of it. When you say it like that, because it seems a little selfish, right? And it's as an artist, you're really hoping to communicate something particular to people. And you're putting all this thought and effort into it. And
to only focus on your creation rather on its creator is precisely the ultimate way to pay respect for your efforts.
I don't care. I just care about what I feel.
Which is not what Barthes is saying. He is not saying anything about judging art using just feelings.